Aunt Jur in Washington. Aunt Jur, what can we do for you tonight?
Hi. I have a question about, is there something that happens in the brain, like the first time you masturbate and or have an orgasm that like you can't undo?
I
For
love
example,
this question. When you break the seal? Yeah, go right ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Nice to hear from you, Roger. Keep going.
For example, this is relevant to give you where my mind was at the time. I was in Bible college, and I had in my own private time, had an orgasm. And afterwards, as you can imagine, I felt horrible. And I was thinking, oh God, what have I done? Have I flipped some switch or awoken something that I can't undo? So
no, you can't put the orgasm back in the bottle, bud. You can't undo that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. Is there something that happens in the brain? Like, if I had never attempted that, would my brain be different? Did I in fact awaken something that I couldn't
Yeah, no, I hear the question and maybe the anxiety behind it. And I think it's such a great issue to raise. Like, do we have a brain cherry? And Shannon, I'm going to let you jump in here, but I guess I'll go ahead and say we do not have a brain cherry any more than we have a vaginal cherry. These ideas around virginity are very, very much like patriarchal constructs. You could say that, yes, your brain changed from a philosophical standpoint in the same way you could say that you can never step into the same river twice. But I don't think it's at all accurate to understand something as being meaningfully different. Shannon, what would you say here?
Yeah, I'm going to elaborate on that, but agree with it essentially, and just add a little bit more like neuroscience salt.
You don't like the term brain cherry? Is that not sufficient?
Oh, I am all about the term brain cherry. I'm going to get a shirt that says I popped my brain cherry. I'm going to make it for myself. I'm stealing all kinds of shit from this show. So from a neurological perspective, think about it this way. Every time you have an experience, you've changed your brain, period. An experience. The experience you're having right now is physiologically changing your brain. Something about it conceptually, something about it perceptually, something about it cognitively is changing your brain. You're incorporating this experience into your memories. You are incorporating this experience into your physiology. You are incorporating this experience into your cognition and how you, like, if I may say something in this conversation that hits you and you think just the way brain cherry hit me, and you may think to yourself, okay, well, that is a really good point, and I'm going to think on that and maybe incorporate it into the way that I perceive other things in the future, because now I see things from a slightly different perspective. When you had an orgasm for the first time, you had an experience you hadn't had before. It's one of a list of many experiences you've had in your life that you hadn't had before you had that experience. And it happens in the same way, like from a neurological perspective to any other experience that you have. What's different about it is a couple of things. The first thing is how society, or maybe your individual community, or maybe you yourself perceived it when it happened, and how that made you think about it and how that made you remember it. And it sounds like it was couched negatively enough that it caused initial guilt in you, where if you hadn't had that as the context, if you hadn't had somebody tell you this is a bad thing that you're doing, you wouldn't have had that guilt. You would have just been like, oh, that's nice. I kind of like that. Maybe I'll do that some more. So that changed your brain too. Your attitude towards it changed your brain. But enjoying sex isn't a sign that you had an orgasm once and your brain went, I'm going to do that all the time now. It just means, and I'm never going to want to do anything else. It just means you had an experience and you either did or didn't like it. And then you incorporated that into how you act in the future. And all of that is based on the context that took place when it happened. I don't know if that helps, but I guess the answer kind of is there is a brain cherry for having your first orgasm, but there is also a brain cherry for having your first bowl of cereal. and they function similarly.
Right.
So basically, if I hadn't been in the like religious mindset I was in, that's what was making me think, oh, I've done something I can't undo. Oh no, like this is like a slippery slope. Oh no, I've ruined everything, kind of a thing.
Yeah,
the meaning that you've given to it. Oh, sorry, Shannon.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah,
go.
The meaning that you've given to it is constructed, and that doesn't mean it isn't important. That doesn't mean it isn't significant. But what it does mean is that it can be deconstructed or reconstructed. You get to decide whether or not your first orgasm is important to you. You get to decide whether or not it matters. And I think it's really worthwhile to acknowledge that repeated experiences where you are pairing orgasm with shame, that can definitely create an association. It doesn't break anything. It doesn't change anything in any sort of like lasting sort of way. But I think it also might explain why perhaps subsequent orgasms were also experienced with a little bit of guilt and shame. And that association can become a lot stronger. And that's something that we see in a lot of folks who had an adolescence where they were exploring their body and exploring their sexuality in the context of religious guilt and religious shame. And we can call that religious trauma. And we can recognize the like meaningful brain damage. If we're just going to throw that term around, we can acknowledge the way that the brain is traumatized or damaged by that association. But there is nothing magical that happens the first time you have an orgasm or the 100th time you have an orgasm beyond whether or not you yourself choose to ascribe a certain magic to that experience. If it was magical to you, that's enough. That's beautiful all on its own. But there's nothing neurologically special, I suppose I should say.
Okay, yeah. I see that it was just all context, the context I was in at the time.
Yeah, I hope you can get past and I hope you can get past and through that, because there can be so much like sexual trauma like that's laden with even this sort of tacit innate religious form of thinking. That's what my friend Ocean calls this latent Christianity, where there's so much of how the lens through which you view the world, more than you even realize overtly, that is driven by a society that has these puritanical ideas that are derived from religious systems that aren't healthy ideas. And because those ideas themselves towards sexuality aren't healthy, we end up having this unhealthy relationship with sex, where we think we're bad, or we think we're doing something wrong, or we think we're doing it wrong, or we think we're doing it for the wrong purpose, or we think we need to do it when we don't. Like, all of those things are unhealthy, and they're thrust upon us when we're just doing something that is so natural that if you took all of that context out of it, it would just be like, oh, I enjoyed that. That was a cool experience. It was just a physiological reaction I had through like mental and physical stimulation that I ended up enjoying. That's neat. We don't need to imbue it with anything more than that, but people imbue it for us and we believe them. And it ends up causing us harm as a result of doing something that like just everybody does all the time, whether they admit it or not. Like, you did nothing wrong. Your brain is fine.
This was well over 20 years ago. So I've grown since then. I mean, I still have issues, but who doesn't? And, you know,
fair.
Not relevant to this particular conversation.
Yeah. I do still appreciate you raising these issues, though, because I know that this is a really common experience. And I love this idea that we're playing with about how culture informs all of this and how it's not biology. You can certainly tell that just by looking at the experiences, like the early sexual experiences and the shame felt by people who were raised in different faith traditions or different parts of the world, or even more so. One of my favorite episodes of this show was very early on. I had an opportunity to speak with Dr. Susan Block, who wrote a book called The Bonobo Way. And I might encourage people who are struggling with some of these feelings of shame to either check out that episode or maybe even find her book, because it highlights so many of the things that we're talking about here. People will have like human beings will have a arousal response to watching bonobos have sex, because the part of their brain that says sex is happening will get activated. That does not mean that people desire sex with chimps or with these like other creatures, but it also can help us to understand that sex is not magical. Not unless we decide that it is, and that the culture that we put on it is not is only culture. It's not locked into our biology. So I hope that by kind of playing around with some of these ideas and understanding what's been like forced upon you and what is actually coming from you and from your body, you can find a little bit more freedom.
Yeah.
Concur.
Cool. I'm glad I called and asked that question that's been kind of in the back of my mind for quite a while.
It's nice to hear your voice. I'm familiar with you from Twitter and live streams and stuff. So it's nice to chat.
Yeah, nice to talk to you.
We appreciate so much hearing from you. I hope you have a great night.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Love that question.